in room 200 in the Mary Grace Center this afternoon. This is a session that deals with Title VI of the Farm Bill, which is about rural issues. That is a very broadly defined set of concepts, always being redefined. In fact, this bill has a redefinition of what it means to be rural, as I understand from reading the Congressional Research Service analysis. My specialty is food security, but I am honored to be here with you today because we have a very impressive panel of experts who know more about this than I will ever be able to teach. So I won't speak a lot. I will just allow them to share their views. To my right, we have Mr. Rudy Arredondo, who has been with the National Latino Farmers and Ranchers Association for the last 13 years. His bio, by the way, appears on our website. I don't believe in reading long bios, but let me tell you that he has been a leader in his field. He has worked with projects with the Department of Agriculture, with Hispanic organizations. He has been a mover and shaker, as we say in the Washington, D.C. area, for the Latino farmers. And to his right, we have, I'm moving down so I don't, I've always been technically challenged because I'm a technology immigrant. I don't know if they deport technology immigrants, but Ben Burkett, who is the president of the National Family Farms Coalition and the current director of the Mississippi Association of Cooperatives. That's the local arm of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. He's both a farmer and an activist, so he speaks from as a practitioner as well as from the heart, because I've heard you speak before, and I know what an excellent speaker you are. And then we have one of my favorite congressmen, because he served in the Peace Corps in Colombia. Am I right, sir? Sí, como no. We have Congressman Sam Farr, who comes from one of the prettiest districts in California, the 20th, which includes the city of Monterey and Carmel, and he was a Peace Corps volunteer, and certainly has had a long career of working on agricultural and rural development in the subcommittee on agriculture. He has been involved in many, many issues that not only relate to the issue of the Farm Bill, but has been a major advocate on the Colombian peace process. My experience with you, I won't tell you how long it goes back, but we do know that when we want an advocate in Congress, we can't get a better advocate than Congressman Farr. So this is a group that you will hear from today on the rural chapter of the Farm Bill that not only knows the subject matter, but really can speak from the heart about how these issues impact people on a daily basis. And hopefully you'll share, in the very short time each of you have, unfortunately, a little bit about your view on this area. And of course, we'll take your questions. If there's something urgent and you have to speak up, give me a two-finger, but otherwise we'll save the questions for the end. So thank you very much for being here this afternoon. So, would you like to start?
I'd like to defer to our honored
I'd like to be last.
in that case, then I will proceed. Like Lauren said, my name is Rudy Arredondo, president of the National Latino Farmers and Ranchers Trade Association. Also a proud member of the National the Rural Coalition, which is the mothership for a truly grassroots, multi-ethnic, community-based organization. We have a diverse membership, which includes tribal, Latino, Asian, African American farmers and ranchers, and we are the shock troops for rural America. And that is unfortunately not a much appreciated situation with Washington, D.C., because it is us that are by default the outreach and the information disseminators with regard to USDA and other farm programs in the United States. And to just kind of tell you what, in December of 1994, then Secretary Mike Gaspy said that he was going to be doing some major actions with regard to the Department of Agriculture. So there was a consolidation in the organization of USDA, 14 agencies, which eliminated about 11,000 jobs, as well as the closure of 2,531 field offices. In January 9, 2010, USDA closed 259 domestic offices, labs and other facilities as part of an effort to save $150 million per year in a $145 billion budget. And of course, there was also a big show of trying to revitalize rural America, to also make an attempt, a big fanfare by then Secretary Vilsack, to bring 100,000 new farmers into the United States. Well, with those figures that I just gave you, it's so unlikely that that would happen. And the situation that we find ourselves in at this state, the negligence of rural America for now decades brings us to where we are now. Rural America is still not at the forefront of any of the existing and present day political discussions. Yet it is they who were responsible in large part for what happened. People are out there are extremely concerned about the lack of rural economic development. Agriculture is the only economic engine in rural America. There is nothing else. Okay. Including those facilities for which we are not exactly very in favor of, or it's not helpful to our farmers, which is your confined animal, to CAFOs, where you have these large entities which pretty much suck out the livelihood of a lot of our farmers through contract farming and mostly contracts of adhesion. And so we also have to deal with the aftermath of some of their practices, which is in terms of the animal waste, the environmental impact, the fact that a lot of the regulations that come out of the USDA and other regulatory agencies have to do with the practices that those huge operations need. We small producers, and the small producers, we are not commodities producers mostly. We produce food. We feed most of you. We are 22%, the small producers, 22% of the food stuff is what we do. And we are extremely careful about how it is that we raise our food. We do the best way we can in terms of attempting to be an organically grown. We also are extremely careful in terms of how we treat our animals. Most of our ranchers, farmers and ranchers, have small herds. They're anywhere between 15 to 30 to maybe 50 or 100 head. And we also utilize their rangery. We graze our cattle, especially in the west and far west, in the forest. Yet we have a tremendous amount of difficulty in terms of accessing USDA programs. The obstacles to which we as small producers have to go through, the hoops, are just incredible. And so it has created tremendous amount of hardship. As some of you may be aware of, there were lawsuits with regard to discriminatory practices by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Pigford cases, which is the black African American lawsuit. There were two phases of that. And we have the Garcia case, which is the Hispanic farmers, which was not a class action. We had the Keep Siegel, which was the Native American lawsuit. The Love case, which is the women. And some of those cases are still unresolved. There was a process that we were instrumental through the Rural Coalition and its partners and allies in getting about 30 sections of the 2008 Farm Bill. And so we were able to inject the fact that this lawsuit that were pending should be settled, even those that did not have a class action status. Well, the process is still incomplete. And there were not only, to add insult to injury, you had to basically attempt to reiterate the fact that you have been discriminated against. And yet there were no consequences on the perpetrators. And the situation in rural America is so desperate, in need of a huge infusion of infrastructure projects. You know, to just, for those of us that work in rural America and or on the ground, this is not just a theoretical and an exercise in although we really appreciate the American University for their practicum and to have their students actually go out and visit our farm sites, because that's really important. It's not just good in having the research, but actually have a practical application to some of the theoretical things that are that universities do. There's not many, even though there's a large sum of funds that are provided to the universities for research. Most of the time, that research is never really applicable, and it's just an exercise. And for us, it's like it's not just we can't use it unless we have you as a theoretician come up and show us what it is that you actually mean with regard to your theories. And with that, I think, so thank you very much.
Great. I'd like to go tell us a little bit more about the lawsuit. And we have a chance for some panel discussion, but I'd like to turn the microphone over to Ben. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. Before state, I'm currently serving as president of the National Family Farm Coalition, which is a coalition of over 30 grassroots organizations from California to Massachusetts. And I'm also a director of the Mississippi Association Cooperative, which is a association of 22 local cooperatives. And my day-to-day job is farming. I'm a fourth generation family farmer. When we talk about Title VI part, which is the rural development part of the Farm Bill, I just like to say a few words how that program, that Title VI have impacted the great state of Mississippi. You know, Mississippi, we have the claim of being 50 in everything. So we number 50, so ain't no way for us to go but up. But we develop a rural development housing project to build 40 units for farm workers. And it was a cost share, we received $900,000 from rural development, USDA, about $500,000 from the state of Mississippi, and the rest was put in by the Federation of Southern Cooperative. From the time we thought about the idea of building these farm worker houses to the time they were actually built was 9 years of process between rural development, the states of Mississippi, and going back and forth. It was a huge undertaking. And rural development also provides funds through cooperative agreements for all type of infrastructure. Rural fire, volunteer fire stations. Even today, some parts of Mississippi do not have clean drinking water. Rural development provides funds for developing community water systems. Also, they have a cooperative development program where they provide through the business development cooperative agreement to provide technical assistance to cooperative and rural towns. And one of the biggest impact that have been by the cutting of the funds on rural development over the administration, all the small towns in Mississippi and Alabama, all through the South, they have eventually just dried up. And the impact of not having significant funds in rural development, many communities now do not have local hospitals. Some is even 40 to 50 miles away before you can get to a hospital. So every time you cut funds from rural development, I think that was one of the main things in President Trump proposed budget that he wanted to cut, was cooperative and the part of rural development. As Rudy stated, it's very important that the support that you need to keep rural America alive should come through Rural Development Tower 6. And when you look at all the business development in these areas, were fund to put in the infrastructure of water and roads and sewage for a new development. I know Mississippi have built a Nissan plant and a Toyota plant. Rural Development Fund provided the infrastructure. So for us to certainly look at agriculture as the only vehicle that can be used to rebuild the rural area. And in the station before, and I got in just before it ended, before lunch, we were talking about the consolidation of the industry. That's having a huge impact on rural areas. Because in my area, where I farm in South Mississippi, there used to be a number of we call mom and pop seed cleaning facilities, where I could save my own corn seed and my own soybean seed, take them and be clean, bag them, bring them back to my own farm, and plant them the next year. That great company called Monsanto put them all out of business. Not because they were cleaning Monsanto seed, they were just taking it afraid to do it, because of the impact that Monsanto might sue them. Saying they were cleaning Monsanto Roundup Ready soybean seed, which they wasn't. So now it's not a local seed cleaning process in the state of Mississippi, where you can save your own seeds. Setting aside the mere fact of just cleaning seeds, soybean seed, but what about all the other seeds we use, such as Bahia grass seeds, Bermuda grass seeds, and oats, and let's just go on and on. Now we have to buy those seeds. But rural development funding is very important to the state of Mississippi. And they might not say so. I'm talking about the governor of Mississippi now. They always talking about cut. But for us to really have an impact in rural America, we have to revitalize the infrastructure, the next generation of farmers, and provide opportunity. I think in the last census, Mississippi has a net loss of population. So all our bright and best young people is going to California, Texas, and other places. We have to stem that by trying to create industry that can have people to stay in place. And I would end by saying that to have a real impact on an economy within a local system, everything has to be in harmony. Where I farm at is called the coastal watershed. So that take in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, a little part of Florida as one ecosystem. So in order for it to be really functional, you have to look at it from production of food, from production of energy, to the conservation of air, water, soil, not just in my little section of land, but from in that whole region. when the rain, the rain that fall on my farm ends up in Mobile Bay. So I have to be very careful. I don't want any nitrogen. I don't want any phosphorus to leave my farm and get in the river system. And I said all of that to say that rural development, USDA, which is the three main agencies in Mississippi, the Farmers Home. I'm talking about the old administration. Farm Service Administration, Rural Development, Natural Resource Conservation Service. They too have to work together, and as Rudy Ford stated, the staff is so few. I'm in a 3-county office. So it's 3 counties, but we got 1 office. So that's putting a lot of pressure on farmers. Almost 50 miles they have to go to USDA office. But I know how all you young people said, there's no need of an office no more. Let's do it all on virtual. Do it all on the computer. So that's what USDA said. But then there's a few of us like me refuse to move forward into the computer age. What that leave us. But again, 3 more minutes.
I think Rudy gave you an extra minute, so let's give you another minute.
I'm through. But again, it's a matter of cooperation together. Rural development, Title VI have a very important place providing farm services and the leadership in rural areas.
Thank you for laying out that case. It's important. So Congressman, what do we do? We're all counting on you.
I'm gonna stand up because my back says killing me. So, thank you very much, Ben Rudy. You really set up the rural perspective. And I've been a congressman in an elective office for 43 years in the local, state, federal level. And I got into Congress and trying to figure out, you have to represent your district in Congress. And my district is really about everything in California. I'm in the Central Coast. I live in Carmel. We have, national marine sanctuaries and national forests, and we have universities, University of California, Cal State Monterey Bay, Naval Postgraduate School, language schools, Monterey Institute of International Studies, and we got it all. And we also have the best agriculture in the United States. The county grows over 100 different crops in one county and does about $8 billion in one county of agricultural sales. And we don't really rely on the federal government. So why did I get into agricultural issues in Congress? I think it was said, I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and what I really realized is that if you don't do sustainable economic development in the rural areas, people don't eat well, don't live well, and so on. I mean, we all have the luxury of being here today because somebody is out there farming so that we don't have to worry about getting food tonight. They're doing it. And that's why you can go on to be university students and doctors and lawyers and Congress members and Peace Corps volunteers because somebody, a very small percentage of American population, about 200,000 people, are providing all the food that allows the rest of us to go out and pursue our dreams. So I got into I got into agricultural issues because it was inspiring to see what Abraham Lincoln did in the middle of the Civil War, creating the Ag Department. He created it because we were in the westward expansion mode, and he realized that all these people who were in the east were living in cities and now wanting to go west, and the government was encouraging them to go west, but they had no ability to survive in the rural areas. They didn't know how to hunt, they didn't know how to kill, they didn't know how to dress, they didn't know how to cook, they didn't know how to build latrines, they didn't know how to build housing, and so the Department of Agriculture was sort of created as a home ec department for the westward expansion, and now it's added since the 1860s to what it is now, which I think is the most broad department in all of it. Has an international issue because in every embassy of the world is an ag advisor. It's in all the natural conservation issues because we have people like fish ambassadors and things like that to do all the fish treaties. It's involved in Wall Street through the Commodities Board. And the financial instruments. In fact, all the big problems that happened with Wall Street started in the derivative market, overseen in the Ag Committee. It has rural economic development. All the rural housing for farmers is not in HUD, it's in the Department of Agriculture. The rural communication, the inability to have internet in communities like yours, and communities like mine, that are in rural areas where it's not for the vendor, for the Verizons and AT&Ts, it's not cost effective to put in the infrastructure because of the few number of people that are there. And those few number of people are the daughters and sons of members farming our communities, and they're like you. They want access to the real world, and they can't get it. So do you think they're gonna stay and work as hard as their mom and dad? No, they're leaving. So what you have in America, the biggest death across this country, are all these rural towns, all of which incredibly had soul of energy to say, we're gonna create this little community of a couple of houses, we're gonna start a store, we're gonna do it. There's still soul there, and I think that I'm really involved in rural tourism because I think that's the great new adventure that we can develop. But it all gets into historical interpretation and how we can develop apps for that, and bringing communities back to being able to market their historical character. A lot of the communities around here in the rural area do that. So it is, economic development is absolutely essential. Sustainable economic development in our rural areas. And I think the cities are gonna, and some cities are just lost. I mean, Los Angeles is so damn big, it's impossible to manage. But my area, which is where California began, in Monterey, California, is where the Spaniards landed in the 1870s with missionaries. And the reason they came there was sort of two things. It was political, because the Russians were coming from the north as fur traders hunting the California sea otter, and they kept creating these establishments. There's a place called Fort Ross in Northern California, which is a Russian port. So the Spaniards decided, we don't want the Russians to dominate all this open territory up there. Let's send up our people. And the missionaries, they paid because they said, well, they'll stay there because they're going to proselytize the native Indians, and at least we'll have mankind living in that real estate, and then we can start claiming it. And that's where Monterey began, and where California, the Westward civilization began in Monterey. And yet, we're not in LA sprawled out, or San Diego, or San Francisco. And why is that? And if you look back through history, it's because the land was producing cattle. You couldn't grow cattle in San Diego, not enough water, LA. And San Francisco was all sand dunes, and most of that bay was that area. So it was this rich Salinas Valley, and they could just start growing cattle. Cattle had hides. Hides could be tanned with local tan bark oak, and then they could be traded. Then you could use the tallow from cattle. And all of a sudden, international trade began in this small, little, tiny Spanish, then Mexican village called Monterey. And we are still one of the most scenic areas in the United States because we have preserved our open space. And we've done it because agriculture has been so successful that even you can't find an acre of agriculture for sale. It never goes on the market. So if you want to own agricultural land, you say you either have to marry it or inherit it because it ain't going to be sold. And if it is, it's going to be far more expensive, like $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 an acre. There aren't any crops other than marijuana where you can make return on your property. And by the way, we may end up being the largest marijuana growing region because we're taking our agriculture acumen and saying to all these flower growers that were wiped out by the Colombian and Ecuadorian imports of flowers, we really got wiped out. And so these flower growers went bankrupt, but there's thousands of greenhouses that now might be a good place because they can be secured and so on to start growing medical marijuana. So it's interesting how this is changing. Now I want to, but I don't want to get, I want to answer any questions. I want to just give you a little background. I'm in politics because I learned as a Peace Corps volunteer that everything was about empowerment. It's not about me. Because I say in politics, I have a pretty liberal, progressive record in politics. And I would hope that if my plane crashes going back to California, or I got run over, or whatever, if something happened, that the people would have enough ability in their own political strength to go out and elect somebody like me. So that you wouldn't have an accident like President Trump. And I think in many ways, if you look at that election, it's not that he got elected, it's that Hillary didn't get elected because her folks just stayed at home. They were announced that, for all kinds of reasons, they didn't want to vote for Hillary. And so he never got more votes than Romney, and Romney lost big time. So what was the difference? Well, it's because the Democrats stayed home. And I'll tell you, what's gonna happen, this farm bill, and why you need to talk about it, is that things you're here about are gonna be wiped out. Wiped out. Because the farm bill has sort of an automatic trigger. If you're big and spend over $50 billion, 50 million, or billion, million, you are kept into the farm bill. You're programmatic. It's kind of like Medicare. It's an entitlement program. They don't call it that. They call it a program. Programs, and they continue on. Meaning, if you're entitled to be in the program, you get it. Commodities are a good example. But I have, and I'll hand out here. Unfortunately, I didn't know how many people would be here, so I probably didn't bring enough. But maybe you could share or get some others. But these are the 37 programs they're going to sunset with the farm bill. Meaning they're not going to exist. There's not going to be an authorization, and certainly there's going to be no money. And you look at those programs, it's everything I think this university and everybody at this conference is concerned with. And looking at it, just, a couple of the ones, and they're marked by title. For example, in the conservation program, there's 5 programs that are wiped out. Grassroots source water protection, the voluntary public access and habitat incentive, small watershed rehabilitation. In fact, that's the largest of all the programs that are getting wiped out, $250 million. Terminal lakes, I'm not sure what that program does, but wetlands mitigation banking. Well, the list goes on in nutrition areas and rural development, the rural micro entrepreneurial assistance program, which I'm sure is very helpful to your farmers, getting wiped out. The value-added agricultural product market development grants. This is really smart. How do you get organic and others into, how do you bring them up into being able to compete in big markets? Pending water and waste disposal applications. Research areas, organic agriculture research and extension. I carried the organic bill in the California legislature and have been sort of the king of organic back here in Congress. That we got in so that we could get research grants just like commodity programs could, and big universities could treat organic research just as responsibly as they treat traditional research. That gets wiped out. And the list goes on. And so what we're going to say, and what my role here is and it's not just here, it's all over, is what I've learned about being in politics, that I really am a subject of youth. I could never get elected to the County Board of Supervisors, the state legislature, the Congress, if it wasn't for votes in my district, for people that supported me, worked in my campaigns, but most of all, just people who voted. And if we've learned anything from the November election and everybody get motivated, is it's if so many people didn't vote. We gave away the power. We just unlocked the door and said, you take over. Because I don't want to have to get out and vote because I've got all kinds of reasons for it. My God, every congressman here, and you saw it happen last Friday, it wasn't that they were listening to the president. It wasn't that they were listening to their party leader, the Speaker of the House. Those Republicans who wouldn't vote for that bill, who were they listening to? The people in their districts all over this country. Because they're up for election in 2 years. This is the only profession in the country where the contract for renewal is up every single 2 years. And you don't have to be elected on merit. You just get elected on popularity. But if what you're doing here in Washington is not popular with the people that are voting for you, I don't care what party they are. If you're going to take away somebody's health care, imagine you're going to take it away, all of a sudden they're going to say, I'm not voting party, I'm just voting for the other guy or the other gal. Because they're not going to take that away. So if we really want to make this farm bill more responsible, more attentive to essential common sense practices in the modern era, which is what I think it's all about. It's really about sustainability. And I think I have a district that really knows how. If you want to go out and see how small farmers survive in a very expensive, competitive state like California, where we don't rely on the federal government to give us handouts. We develop these markets, strawberry markets, small markets, organic strawberry markets. Our organic strawberry pickers, you know what they make? $33 an hour, plus healthcare, plus an 401k. Why do you pay your strawberry pickers that? Because they pick that same plant every 3 days, 4 days. So if you're a grower of strawberries, you put about $47,000 into just getting those plants in the ground and caring for them, so when the berry comes ripe, you can send the people in. They're gonna be back there every 3 days, same field. You're gonna keep the same people in employment every single day of the year, almost. And you want the same people back because they did a really good job picking your crop last year. So they become family members. And that's why our growers are so much, all of them in California, for immigration reform. Our biggest issue in California is not the farm bill, because we grow over 140 crops in the state. But we're not so reliant on the federal government. What we're worried about is labor force. And we just did an incredible thing in California. There's a company called Tanamura and Antle, put together after the Second World War, Japanese that went to an internment camp, and the growers, Italian family, the shippers took care of their farms while they were in internment camp. And when they came back, they got together and said, let's develop a partnership. You, the Japanese family, you grow really well, and we know how to ship. So why don't we form a grower-shipper company called Tanamura and Antle? We all grow lettuce. Lettuce is our expertise, and we'll do that. It's a $1 billion lettuce company. You know what they just did because they want to keep their farm workers? They turned it into an ESOP. You know what that is? The workers own the company. And now we're having ads in the newspaper of the harvester in the field cutting the lettuce saying, I own the company. I'm an owner. And a woman putting the lettuce in the box saying, I'm an owner. Do you think those people are going to leave when they own the company? And this is, I mean, you want to really ultimately help our farm laborers make them, this company's done it. The economics are there. We've got to advocate it. And I think what you heard at the lunch, which is so important, we give away all this money in Washington without any strings attached. And you know why California doesn't get a lot of it? For example, the conservation, we get screwed on the conservation money. You know why? Because we use zoning. We're saying if that's a riparian area or that's a habitat, you can't go farm on that land. I don't care if you own it privately. We have a responsibility in the community in our land use planning and our zoning laws to protect that kind of habitat. So you're not going to farm, or you're not going to till wrong, or your soil's going to run into the rivers and clog them and kill all the fish. So I think what we really have to do is the rural America has to recapture the rural politics and say, you do it our way, politicians, or you're not coming back. Because that is a real force. Tip O'Neill, famous quote, everybody in Washington will say it. All politics is local. The House of Congress, the House of Representatives, and the Senate are the only places in Washington where they really have to be local politics, because that's the only way to get there. They get here, it's from that local vote. So here, instead of listening to people telling you what's going to happen with the Farm Bill, you be that Farm Bill. Let's follow Gandhi's lead. Be the change you want to see. You write that Farm Bill, not Congress. Thank you very much.
Would that every state were able to legislate like California. So we've heard some very provocative ideas and some very good points about the rural chapter of the Farm Bill, but I'd like to dig down a little bit deeper with our panelists. And I wanted to go to something you said, Ben, because at the end you mentioned, you know, most kids are virtual and you don't have that. But one of the issues, or one of the things that is funded in the rural chapter is actually internet and access to broadband. And I always know when I have colleagues, even from big farm states like Nebraska, when they come to my office in Washington and say, oh my God, your internet is so fast. I can't believe it. So, I mean, these are real issues moving forward, even just for weather information as we become more and more dependent. What do you see in your community, for example, thinking about the impact of the Farm Bill? How does it affect the small rural community in Mississippi?
I agree with the Congressman 100%. Where I stay at it, we've been promised high-speed internet, but they always said we would have it in 2 years. We've been saying that for about 6 years, we still have it. But you have to have a local, municipalities put together the plan, present it to rural development for funding, and even the funding to put together the proposal is not there now. So I agree with you, 100, it's definitely needed in the rural area, that the ability to have quality internet service, but, if this budget goes through, it won't be able to, it won't have access to it.
And what,
Yeah, well, one of the things that not just the USDA, but certainly USDA as one of the agencies that we are in need in rural communities for our farming, is access to broadband. And it's not there. It's not there there's almost a requirement that most of the applications with regard to proposals that are needed in order to be able to access some of those resources or done via the internet.
So you could condition this in the Farm Bill saying, okay, these rural areas that are underserved by internet, let's make them a priority by not allowing other kinds of subsidy programs to be triggered in those counties without first spending the money on infrastructure. It makes great economic sense to do it. It pushes the internet provider to okay, now we got to prioritize, because we got all these farmers that can't get the other stuff they want because government isn't going to give it to us until we sort of build the roads in order to get to the farm. And that's what you've got to do. You can't leave it in this silo and saying, oh, it's just going to be out there and hopefully somebody will get around to it. You've got to use the pressure in this Farm Bill. You're, first of all, going to get all these programs reinstated, and then the budget's going to come in and say, well, they don't exist, so we don't have to pay for them, and we want to cut everything we have anyway. So why should we go back and restore these programs when we don't even have the money for the ones that we're going to continue? So it's going to be a huge fight, and it's going to be small against big, but small is rural America. And rural America elects politicians, and if we get organized, we can prioritize what we want out of the Farm Bill. And Earl Blumenauer, who's just a phenomenal congressman from Portland, Oregon, is really, of all the people in Congress, he's actually setting up a grassroots movement nationwide. I just handed out his website. And Kevin Sockett, Kevin's right here with his hand up. If you have any questions about how to get involved on helping really an insider write this Farm Bill to your interests, talk to Kevin.
well, not only that, but we should put it up on the website of the conference and the proceedings, so you can say it out loud if you want to say, what is the name of the website?
Sure, so it's actually email address, it's very simple, it's
Better-
betterfarmbill@mail.house.gov.
Okay,
And it's on that sheet, and we'd be more than happy to send out additional information if you want to talk to me after that.
Give me that address again.
A better farm bill,
Better Farm Bill.
betterfarmbill@mail.house.gov.
We will get it up and put it on the website so everybody after this.
At mail.house.gov is the common
It's the
Gmail
predicate.
address for everything and every member of Congress.
So if, with due respect to the panel, we have a lot of people that are busting out of their seats wanting to comment. I think this is a people's conference, so please, Aaron, you want to get captain this?
I don't think I do. I just was wondering from.
It's for recording, so
Oh, okay.
please state your name, though.
My name is Jose Arteaga. I'm from Puerto Rico, but grew up in Wisconsin. And I witnessed firsthand election cycle after election cycle after election cycle. Rural Wisconsinites knowingly vote against their own self-interest, knowing they were voting for Republicans that were against what was in their best interest as family farmers, because they could not vote for politicians that also stood for pro-choice, for gay rights, and for all that. And I think that until we get this rural culture war thing resolved, we are forever going to have a rural electorate that's going to vote against their own best interests because they just cannot get in with those other cultural war issues, in my opinion.
Well, I think rural cultures are poverty cultures, and they're going to die. They're not going to get the attention, and they'll be absorbed somehow other ways. You just saw what's happening in my area. We invented the organic industry in this country, in California, in my region, by just small kind of sixties hippie farmers deciding they didn't wanna have to spend all this money doing it the traditional way, and they were gonna do it with, non-chemical agriculture, and developing out of farmers markets. And then they went, because they were active in politics, they went to the school boards and got the school boards to say, hey, the children in the school, their parents are growing this organic food, why don't you serve it in the restaurant? I mean, in the school lunch program. And, the school boards in this country have they don't do the politics of lunch, because that's all paid for by the federal government. So it's a pass-through. You ask most superintendents, what are you feeding your kids in the lunchroom? They have no idea. So, it's all federal stuff. We don't have to argue over that. It's not like trying to hire a new math teacher. Well, you take that same school board and say, this is our kids, we want them to eat healthy. You make sure that school serves the stuff that's grown here locally. Now, there are gazillion places around the United States that can show you how to organize that so that the local farmers can get their food into the schools. But that's a multi-billion-dollar buying program. And it's outside the Farm Bill. It's done in the school nutrition program, which is in the Department of Education.
Actually, the city of Baltimore has a very effective program for school lunches like that. But I don't want to take anybody more time. We have 1, 2, 3 people. Erin, you are on that side, so why don't we start and we'll then go to this gentleman and then.
Should we take the 3 comments all in a
Yeah,
row, and
let's
then
do
we
that
can
because
listen
for
and respond?
effectiveness, so our panelists can respond. And Rudy had something to add also, so let's get the questions, then you can add that if you don't mind.
Hi, I'm Laura Bryant, Natural Resources Defense Council. I'm really interested in farm diversification and crop diversification. And Mr. Burkett, your story about rural infrastructure and about there not being enough places to go and clean your seed really resonates with me because I've heard that a lot from farmers as one of the barriers to, I guess, putting whatever it is back in the bottle and getting away from the monoculture system and getting back to diversity is the infrastructure isn't there. And I was wondering if you and the rest of the panel could talk more about what else can we do besides funding for rural infrastructure to open those opportunities back up again and when we have giants like Monsanto that are kind of getting in the way on the other hand. So.
Good, next question.
And I'm Howard Schaefer, and I just wanted to comment that I understand the issues in rural communities, but having lived through it all, it started toward the end of the civil rights movement as white backlash. And that's what changed the rural counties and the way they vote. And we're going to need to deal with those kind of issues because race is the underlying issue in rural communities. And then the issue of gender and the issue of abortion came along later. But the issue that turned everything was white backlash. I lived through it.
Rudy and Dan, in terms of private sector investment in telecommunications capability, my name is Charles Sharp. I'm with the Black Emergency Managers Association. How do you see this private industry coming into it help? Because even in Africa, you have your cell phone, you have wireless networks, and that's out in rural areas where there's bike access. How do you see that contributing? And Representative Fark, we have members in California, so what we see now with my members there, there's a lot of urban farming to address that issue for schools. Do you see that spreading more? A lot of public schools before they were state by Department of Education.
Okay, and this gentleman up front, let's get the questions out and then we can refresh everybody's memory.
Hi, my name is Todd Wickersham, and I actually got to go to school at UC Santa Cruz and do pieces on organic agriculture. But the question that I've come across in this issue is related to livestock and the slaughterhouses being dominated by a few slaughterhouses in a few areas. And are there opportunities for mobile processing facilities and ways for the federal government and the Farm Bill to address allowing small producers to have access to that level of
Yeah, I did one. I'll tell you about it.
Okay.
Okay, so I think, let's start with Rudy who had a comment and we didn't let him go
Yeah,
forward.
my comment was with regard to, you know, there's at least two sides. I used to work for Farmers Home Administration back in the 70s. And before that, with the Rural House Alliance, which we did self-help housing throughout the United States, and where people actually contributed 2,000 hours of sweat equity, and they would get a reduced loan from the U.S. Department of Agriculture for their efforts at a reduced interest loan. But two sides that I attempted to work with, one was Puerto Rico, and the other one was Hawaii. Those two sides were considered resort, and so those of us that worked in those that had responsibility for those sites were barely able, maybe once, and that created tremendous difficulty, particularly in Puerto Rico, which imports 80% of their foodstuff. Hawaii is lesser so because they actually have voting. They're actually a state. But, you know, those issues, the fact is that those rural communities nonetheless need to have staff work there. And most of the time that you have your high-level dignitaries from the Department of Agriculture go there, it's mostly a cameo appearances, photo op. There is no real work that gets done by, except what perhaps the staff is able to gather. But it's very difficult to do the work there. With regard to the access to broadband, the providers have laid out some incredible obstacles that even in some municipalities who would have the capacity to have an infrastructure, they're prohibited by regulation to be able to do that. So we attempted to do some of that, and we say we can't do it because we are prohibited by to provide access to our broadband because of this regulation. So those are things that and the thing is that your income, your telephone tax, excise tax, pays for supposedly access to provide resources for those rural communities. But, you know, the money is given to the same people and expecting different results, and that doesn't happen.
Okay, Ben?
Yes, and your relationship to how we can diversify the crops and the animals is very important. As I first stated, because of the monopoly, most of the seed cleaning, local seed cleaning without it. It's also the same thing in the meat processing. As young folks stated, it's only one plant in Mississippi now that farmer can take their animals and have them slaughtered and get USDA stamp where they can go back and sell in the farmer's market. Only one left in the whole state of Mississippi, and it's up for sale. So I agree with you 100%. We have to rebuild that infrastructure to have that diversity. Probably now all the corn come from one gene, or most of the soybeans come from one gene. So we're all planting the same seeds. So if the disease hit one crop, it'll wipe it all out. So it definitely is a need for that diversity there. And in the case of trying to get private enterprises to do infrastructure for high-speed internet, they always go to the thing, there's not enough homes out here. They're too far apart to put in the infrastructure in the rural area. They can't see as private how they're gonna get their return back. But that way you need some support. And I agree with the congressman too, but we can't say we can do anything in Mississippi without the government. But that's the biggest source of income to the state of Mississippi. Transfer of funds, Social Security, welfare. So we need this help. And I agree with the other gentleman back there as a old young civil rights, race is still the problem. And Mississippi. I've been fortunate to serve on 2 race commissions for the state of Mississippi. And what we came to the conclusion, until they get together, we will always be 50. Until that problem is solved in Mississippi, we will always be there. But I'm one of those believers, a place for government is a place for free enterprise. Sometimes they work together, sometimes they don't. And the organic movement started in California, I agree with it. But everything that starts in California, it takes 20 years to get to Mississippi.
Because all the Mississippians moved out there to do it.
So now we're doing, trying to do school lunch program. We're trying to do this. A few years ago, we won a few farmers markets. Now every town and every crossing in Mississippi want a farmers market, but what? There's no farm. And I get called every day. You want to come to my farmers market? You want to come to my farm market? And I rather go to a farm. The only farm market I go to New Orleans when I don't want to come back. When I make in New Orleans, I'm gonna spend in New Orleans. But the need is there. And I will answer. I got 3 great nephews. One's a chemical engineer, one an electrical engineer, one an industrial engineer. And I've been pushing them and saying, that's something you all could do. Y'all bright man to put internet and all everything else we need out in the rural area. Oh, they graduated from Mississippi State, but they're all just resident of Houston, Texas. But they got that knowledge there. And I'm on their case all the time. We invested all this in. It's something that you can do to bring back to help us in the rural area. So we talk all the time, you know. Even developing, I talked with one the other day about developing a small wind power solar irrigation system. You know, I could use if you could design me something, the wind, that I can use the wind to pump my water out the ground to irrigate my crop. So it's just a matter of getting it all in place.
Sounds like